Move to the back where you belong. First class is for people who can actually afford it, not charity cases. The words sliced through the hushed cabin of Flight 873 like a blade sharp and deliberate. Vanessa Morgan stood in the aisle, designer handbag dangling from her wrist lips, curled in disdain as she stared down at 11-year-old Marcus Williams. The boy sat perfectly still, in seat 2A, hands folded in his lap, eyes straight ahead. First-class passengers froze. A businessman paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. An elderly woman's knitting needles stilled. Flight attendant Isabella Rodriguez, checking the overhead bins, turned slowly, her practiced smile faltering. In that suspended moment, you could almost hear the collective intake of breath as every witness processed what they'd just heard. The naked prejudice directed at a child. Marcus didn't flinch, though his knuckles whitened slightly as he gripped the armrests. Inside, his heart hammered against his ribs, but his grandfather's words echoed. Your dignity isn't given to you by others, and it can't be taken away unless you surrender it. Before I tell you how this confrontation ends, let me ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up against injustice, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. American Airways Flight 873 from Chicago to San Francisco was preparing for departure. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces and leather seats. Outside, snow dusted the February tarmac at O'Hare International Airport, but inside the cabin hummed with pre-flight anticipation. Isabella Rodriguez had been working this route for 7 years. At 32, she prided herself on handling difficult situations efficiently. In her crisp navy uniform, with her dark hair swept into a bun, she embodied professionalism. But even she wasn't prepared for what was unfolding. She'd noticed the tension brewing when Vanessa Morgan strode through the cabin doors, trailing her reluctant teenage daughter. Isabella had seen that look before, the entitled scan, the assessment of who might be vulnerable. What Vanessa Morgan didn't realize as she loomed over Marcus Williams was that in exactly 8 minutes, she would face the most humiliating moment of her privileged life. 8 minutes before the captain's footsteps would echo down the aisle. 8 minutes before justice would be served at 35,000 feet. But first, let's rewind to see how this confrontation began and who these people really are. Because this isn't just about a seat on an airplane. It's about dignity, respect, and what happens when someone who's never been told no collides with someone who refuses to be diminished. Vanessa Morgan's heels clicked against the carpet as she made her way through first class, each step radiating authority. Her cream cashmere sweater and tailored pants signaled wealth, as did her highlighted blonde hair and the tennis bracelet that caught the light. Behind her trailed Olivia, her 13-year-old daughter, who seemed to shrink inside her designer hoodie, eyes darting apologetically to passengers. Her mother brushed past. Beneath Vanessa's confident exterior lay a storm of insecurity. Yesterday's lost real estate deal, her third major setback this month, still stung. Her ex-husband's engagement announcement last week had reopened old wounds. The anxiety medication she'd doubled this morning wasn't helping. Today she desperately needed to feel in control of something. Her gaze swept the cabin and landed on Marcus Williams, a young black boy, sitting alone in 2A, the coveted window seat with extra legroom. He was dressed in pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt, small backpack tucked beneath the seat in front of him. For Vanessa, the calculation was simple. Young plus black plus alone equals doesn't belong in first class. The seat next to Marcus was empty, the very seat she believed her daughter deserved. She approached with a manufactured smile. "Hello there," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Are you lost?" "Economy boarding is through the other door." Marcus looked up from his book. "No, ma'am. This is my seat." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Are you traveling all by yourself?" she asked, glancing around for any adults. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus answered. "I'm visiting my grandfather in San Francisco." "I see," Vanessa said, though clearly she didn't. Her eyes narrowed. Well, there seems to be a mix-up with the seating. My daughter and I are supposed to be seated together, and this is actually our row. The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly. Marcus didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced his boarding pass. This is my seat assignment, ma'am. 2A. Vanessa barely glanced at the document. Oh, those computer systems make mistakes all the time. By now, Isabella was hovering nearby. Several passengers had turned to watch discomfort evident on their faces. My ticket is correct, Marcus said quietly. I saved up for 2 years to buy this seat. Vanessa's facade cracked slightly. 2 years, she scoffed. First-class tickets cost thousands of dollars. Yes, ma'am. $2,754 for this flight. I saved $2.75 per week from my allowance, plus birthday money and extra chores. Vanessa's patience was wearing thin. She turned to her daughter. Olivia, tell him. Tell him how you're a straight-A student headed for an academic competition. Olivia looked mortified. Mom, please, she whispered. Let's just find our actual seats. But Vanessa was too invested now. Her voice rose, ensuring the entire cabin could hear. My daughter is a future lawyer. She deserves this seat more than you do. She needs the space to review her notes before her competition. The word deserves hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about who Vanessa believed had the right to occupy premium spaces. Marcus remained composed, though his voice softened. I'm sorry about your daughter's competition, but this is my seat. I earned it. Earned it. Vanessa's laugh was sharp. What could a child like you possibly know about earning anything? For a fleeting moment, doubt crossed her face. A voice in the back of her mind, one that sounded suspiciously like her therapist, whispered that she was crossing a line. She pushed it away. My grandfather taught me about earning things, Marcus said simply. He said what you earn through your own effort belongs to you forever. Vanessa's face flushed with anger and something else. Shame. Her financial troubles flashed through her mind. The mortgage she could barely afford, the credit cards stretched to their limits, the facade of wealth she maintained at increasing cost. Listen here, she hissed, leaning down so her face was inches from Marcus's. I don't know what game you're playing, but this ends now. I've been flying first class since before you were born. People like you don't just end up in seats like this without some kind of mistake. The phrase people like you rippled through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman across the aisle audibly gasped. Olivia tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, stop it. Everyone's staring. Tears welled in her eyes, but Vanessa was beyond reason now. Her carefully constructed image of superiority was being challenged by an 11-year-old boy who refused to be intimidated. I'm not going to ask again, she said, her voice low. Get up and move to wherever your actual seat is. Now. Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about his father's words. You never have to raise your voice to speak truth to power. He thought about his grandfather's lessons on dignity, and then he looked Vanessa Morgan directly in the eye and delivered the response that would change everything. To understand the weight of this moment, you need to know who Marcus Williams really is. This isn't just any 11-year-old boy. This is a child raised with intention, purpose, and an unwavering sense of self-worth, despite a world that often tried to diminish him. Marcus lives in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood with his father, Dr. James Williams, a respected pediatrician at the University of Chicago Children's Hospital. Their apartment is modest but comfortable, filled with books and photographs, the walls adorned with African art and framed academic achievements. Dr. Williams chose this diverse neighborhood rather than the more affluent suburbs where many of his colleagues lived, believing that community and character mattered more than square footage. Marcus's mother, Elaine, died from pneumonia complications when he was just 4. He has few concrete memories of her, but he knows her through the stories his father tells each night. How she laughed with her whole body, how she could name every constellation, how she dreamed of traveling the world with her family. Your mother believed that seeing different parts of the world wasn't just about tourist attractions, Dr. Williams would tell his son. It was about understanding that there are a million different ways to live a good life. After Elaine's death, Dr. Williams poured himself into both his medical practice and raising his son. He worked long hours, but never missed Marcus's school events or basketball games. The Williams household ran on schedules, mutual respect, and open communication. But perhaps the most formative relationship in Marcus's life was with his grandfather, retired Colonel Harold Williams. A decorated veteran who had served in Vietnam and the First Gulf War, Colonel Williams carried himself with the kind of dignity that commands respect without demanding it. At 73, he still stood ramrod straight. His salt and pepper hair closely cropped, his hands strong from decades of discipline. Colonel Williams had moved to San Francisco 5 years ago after his wife's death, needing a fresh start. But distance hadn't diminished his influence on his grandson. Every Sunday evening without fail, grandfather and grandson spoke by video call. These weren't casual check-ins. They were deliberate lessons in character, finance, history, and self-respect. It was during one of these calls, 2 years ago, that Marcus first mentioned wanting to visit his grandfather in first class. First class Colonel Williams had repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's quite a goal. Why first class specifically? 9-year-old Marcus had thought carefully before answering. Because I want to know what it feels like to have earned something special, not just been given it. Something in that answer resonated with Colonel Williams. The following Sunday, he unveiled what would become known as the First Class Project. Together, they calculated exactly how much a first-class ticket from Chicago to San Francisco would cost. They researched price fluctuations, seasonal discounts, and loyalty programs. The final figure, approximately $2,750. That's a lot of money, Marcus had said, eyes wide. Yes, it is, his grandfather agreed, which means you'll learn a lot by earning it. Thus began Marcus's 2-year journey of disciplined saving. Colonel Williams helped him create a savings plan, $2.75 per week from his $5 allowance, plus extra earnings from additional chores, academic achievements, and birthday gifts. Dr. Williams supported the project, opening a special savings account where Marcus could deposit his money and watch it grow. Every Sunday, Marcus reported his progress to his grandfather. Together, they tracked the growing sum, calculated interest, and discussed the value of delayed gratification. These weren't just financial lessons. They were exercises in perseverance, planning, and perspective. Money is just a tool, Marcus Colonel Williams would say. The real value is in understanding what it represents. In this case, your commitment, your discipline, your word. As the savings grew, so did Marcus's pride in his accomplishment. He turned down trips to the movies with friends, saved his lunch money by bringing food from home, and picked up extra chores around the neighborhood. When classmates showed off new video games or sneakers, Marcus thought about his first-class seat, about the moment he would finally visit his grandfather, having truly earned his way there. The project became about more than just an airplane seat. It became a tangible lesson in setting goals, working steadily toward them, and maintaining dignity along the way. Colonel Williams wove in stories from his military career about maintaining composure under pressure, about standing your ground without losing your grace. There will be times, he told Marcus during one of their calls, when people will look at you and decide you don't belong somewhere. They'll make assumptions about what you can afford, what you deserve, what you're capable of. In those moments, remember your belonging isn't determined by their perception. It's secured by your actions, your character, and your truth. These weren't abstract lessons for Marcus. Even at 11, he had already experienced the small indignities that come with being a young black boy in America. The way security guards followed him in stores, the assumptions teachers sometimes made about his academic abilities, despite his consistent high performance, the backhanded compliments about being so well-spoken. After one particularly difficult day at school, when a substitute teacher had repeatedly confused him with the only other black boy in class, despite their different heights and appearances, Marcus had come home frustrated and hurt. Dr. Williams had sat with his son at the kitchen table, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "This won't be the last time someone fails to truly see you," he'd said. But you have a choice in how you respond. You can let their blindness define you, or you can let your own vision of yourself prevail. Now sitting in seat 2A on Flight 873, facing Vanessa Morgan's entitlement and prejudice, Marcus was drawing on every lesson his father and grandfather had instilled in him. This wasn't just about an airplane seat. This was about everything he'd been taught about standing his ground, maintaining his composure, and refusing to be diminished by someone else's narrow perception. To understand Vanessa Morgan is to understand privilege preserved like an insect in amber, unchanged by time or circumstance. But beneath her polished exterior lies a woman crumbling under pressures she never acknowledges, even to herself. At 42, Vanessa was the product of 3 generations of wealth, each passing down not just financial assets, but also an unshakable belief in their inherent superiority. She grew up in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, in a sprawling apartment with views of Lake Michigan and staff who anticipated her needs. From her earliest years, Vanessa absorbed the unspoken rules of her social stratum: appearances matter above all else. Inconveniences are things that happen to other people, and money can solve any problem. She attended elite private schools where diversity was a buzzword in brochures, but rarely a reality in classrooms. When Vanessa misbehaved as a child, throwing tantrums in restaurants, bullying classmates who didn't wear the right brands, her parents' solution was never discipline, but distraction. A new toy, a shopping trip, a surprise vacation. She grew up without boundaries, without consequences, without the crucial understanding that other people were fully human in the same way she was. But what no one saw, what Vanessa herself refused to acknowledge, was the profound insecurity that drove her relentless pursuit of status. Her parents' approval had always been conditional on her performance, on maintaining the family's social position. Praise came not when she showed kindness or creativity, but when she secured invitations to exclusive events or dated appropriate young men from similar backgrounds. She married Richard Morgan, a tax attorney from a similar background, and they had Olivia. For a while, Vanessa believed she had achieved the perfect life. The right husband, the right home, the right child, all arranged like furniture in a showcase house. But the perfection was as thin as gold leaf and just as fragile. When Richard left her for his legal assistant 3 years ago, Vanessa's carefully constructed world cracked. The divorce was messy, public, and humiliating. Though she received a generous settlement, her social standing took a hit. Former friends whose dinner parties she'd once graced now excluded her from guest lists. What no one knew was that Richard had left her not just for another woman, but because he could no longer tolerate the person Vanessa had become. Cold, status-obsessed, incapable of genuine connection. His parting words had cut deeper than any legal document. "You care more about how things look than how they are. I feel sorry for you, Vanessa." Those words haunted her, emerging in quiet moments before sleep, but she pushed them away with the practiced denial that had become her primary coping mechanism. Vanessa channeled her hurt and rage into reclaiming her position. She worked longer hours closing bigger deals. She doubled her spending on appearances, more expensive clothes, more invasive cosmetic procedures, more ostentatious displays of wealth. She pushed Olivia toward achievements that could be showcased on social media and mentioned at fundraisers. But reality was catching up with Vanessa in ways she couldn't control. The real estate market had cooled significantly. 3 major deals had fallen through in the past month alone. Her credit cards were approaching their limits. The mortgage on her Gold Coast apartment, which she'd refused to downsize after the divorce, consumed an increasingly unsustainable portion of her income. Just yesterday, she had lost a major commercial property deal to a younger competitor. The client had cited her inability to connect as the reason they went elsewhere. This rejection, coming after months of trying to rebuild her reputation, had left her seething with resentment and determined to reassert control wherever she could. Which brings us to Flight 873, where Vanessa saw an unaccompanied black child in first class and immediately identified an easy target for her displaced anger, someone she could dominate to soothe her bruised ego. What she didn't account for was that Marcus Williams was not in fact an easy target. Olivia Morgan existed in the uncomfortable space between who her mother raised her to be and who she was becoming on her own. At 13, she was tall for her age, with her father's warm brown eyes and her mother's blonde hair, though she'd recently taken to wearing it pulled back in a simple ponytail, rather than in the elaborate styles Vanessa preferred. Unlike her mother, Olivia attended a progressive private school with a genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. Her favorite teacher, Ms. Abernathy, led frank discussions about history, privilege, and responsibility. Last semester, Olivia's class had researched civil rights movements around the world, preparing presentations on figures from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malala Yousafzai. Olivia had chosen to research Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old girl who integrated an all-white school in New Orleans in 1960. Something about Ruby's courage, her dignity in the face of adult hatred, had resonated deeply with Olivia. She'd spent hours in the library, reading everything she could find about that moment in history. "I don't understand how grown-ups could be so cruel to a little kid," she'd told her father during one of their weekend visits, just because she looked different from them. Richard Morgan had looked at his daughter thoughtfully. "People fear what threatens their understanding of the world," he'd said, "and sometimes that fear turns into something ugly." These lessons stood in stark contrast to what Olivia experienced at home with Vanessa, where worth was measured by exclusivity, where "those people" was a common phrase, where service workers were treated as invisible unless they made a mistake. The cognitive dissonance was becoming increasingly difficult for Olivia to manage. She loved her mother, the Vanessa who stroked her hair when she was sick, who could still make her laugh with silly dance moves in the kitchen, who kept the photo of Olivia's first piano recital on her nightstand. But she was growing increasingly uncomfortable with her mother's behavior toward others. Just last week, Olivia had watched in horror as Vanessa berated a barista for making her latte with 2% milk instead of skim. "If you can't handle a simple coffee order, no wonder you're stuck in a job like this," Vanessa had snapped. In the car afterward, Olivia had gathered her courage. "Mom, that wasn't nice. He made a simple mistake." Vanessa had looked genuinely surprised. "Nice, I'm not paying for mistakes, Olivia. When you accept mediocrity, that's exactly what you'll get in life." The response had troubled Olivia deeply. She'd spent that night texting with her father, asking questions about values and respect that he struggled to answer without criticizing her mother directly. Now, watching her mother confront Marcus on the plane, Olivia was experiencing that same sinking feeling of shame and contradiction. She recognized the familiar signs of her mother winding up for a public meltdown: the tight smile, the clipped consonants, the slightly raised chin. So instead of intervening, Olivia stood in the aisle of Flight 873, arms wrapped around herself, silently willing her mother to stop, to walk away, to be the person Olivia needed her to be, rather than the person Vanessa had always been. Isabella Rodriguez had been watching the confrontation unfold with growing concern. With nearly a decade of experience as a flight attendant, she developed a sixth sense for situations that could escalate quickly. The tension between Vanessa Morgan and young Marcus Williams had all the warning signs of an incident that could delay takeoff, or worse. Isabella approached with a professional smile. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, positioning herself slightly closer to Marcus in a subtle show of protection. Vanessa turned, relief washing over her face at the appearance of an authority figure. "Finally. No, everything is not all right. There's been a seating mix-up. This child is in our seats and he's refusing to move. I'd be happy to help sort this out. May I see both of your boarding passes, please?" Marcus silently handed over his pass. Vanessa fumbled in her designer handbag, producing 2 economy boarding passes for seats 23E and 23F, which she thrust toward Isabella with the confidence of someone who expected reality to conform to her will. Isabella examined both documents, taking her time despite Vanessa's impatient sighs. Ma'am, according to these boarding passes, this young man is correctly seated in 2A, which he has purchased as a first-class ticket. Your assigned seats are in the main cabin, 23E and 23F. Vanessa's face flushed. That's impossible. There must be some mistake with your computer system. We always fly first class. Our system is working correctly, ma'am, Isabella replied. If you'd like, I can check if there are any available upgrades, though this flight is nearly full. The professional response only seemed to fuel Vanessa's indignation. This is ridiculous, she hissed. How could a child his age possibly afford a first-class ticket? It's obviously a mistake. Isabella's smile tightened slightly. Our records indicate that this ticket was purchased legitimately. I saved for it, Marcus added quietly. For 2 years. I have the receipt on my phone if you need to see it. Vanessa scoffed. 2 years. Please. Do you know how much first-class tickets cost? $2.754 for this flight, Marcus answered. I saved $2.75 per week from my allowance plus birthday money and extra chores. The precise answer threw Vanessa off balance. She hadn't expected this child to have such a clear understanding of the value of his purchase. For a moment, self-doubt crept in. She remembered the credit card bill she'd been avoiding opening the calls from the mortgage company she'd been ignoring. Then anger surged back stronger than before. Even if that's true, which I doubt my daughter needs this seat more than he does. She's participating in a prestigious academic competition in San Francisco. Isabella looked at Olivia, who seemed to be trying to make herself invisible. I understand your daughter's accomplishment is important, she said gently. But I can't ask another passenger to give up a seat they've legitimately purchased. By now, the confrontation had attracted the attention of the entire first-class cabin. Passengers were watching openly, some with discomfort, others with growing outrage at Vanessa's behavior. Anthony Parker, a 58-year-old business executive in seat 3C, had been observing the scene unfold over the rim of his reading glasses. A frequent flyer with over 1 million miles logged he'd seen his share of entitled behavior, but something about a grown woman bullying a child triggered a particular kind of anger in him. Excuse me, he said, his deep voice carrying authority, honed over decades in boardrooms. I couldn't help overhearing. Young man, how long did you say you saved for that ticket? 2 years, Sir, Marcus replied. Anthony nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Vanessa. 2 years of discipline and dedication. I'd say that makes this his seat not just by purchase but by merit. His tone was pleasant, but his message unmistakable. Vanessa bristled. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does, Anthony replied calmly. We're all sharing this space for the next few hours. Civility concerns everyone. From across the aisle, Mrs. Garcia, a 72-year-old retired teacher with silver hair and keen eyes, joined the conversation. I taught elementary school for 45 years, she said, her slight accent reflecting her Mexican heritage. In all that time, I never ceased to be amazed by the dignity children can show when adults around them fail to do so. She smiled warmly at Marcus. Your grandfather must be very proud of you, mijijo. Vanessa's expression darkened. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by strangers, and certainly not in defense of someone she'd already dismissed as unworthy of consideration. This is absurd, she snapped. All of you are acting like I'm the villain here when I'm simply trying to secure appropriate accommodations for my daughter's academic needs. Mom Olivia whispered urgently. Please, let's just go to our seats. This is so embarrassing. For a split second, Vanessa almost relented. She saw the genuine distress in her daughter's eyes, heard the plea in her voice. She felt a momentary flash of clarity. Was this really who she wanted to be? What was she teaching Olivia? But the thought of backing down, of admitting she was wrong, of walking to economy class while everyone watched, proved too much for her pride to bear. I won't be treated this way, she declared loudly. Not by a child. Not by flight attendants who don't know how to do their jobs, and certainly not by nosy passengers who should mind their own business. Isabella maintained her composure, though her patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, I need to ask you to lower your voice. We're preparing for departure, and this disruption is delaying our schedule. Lindsay Harrison, A 35-year-old marketing executive seated in 1D had begun recording the confrontation discreetly on her phone. With over 200,000 followers on her social media accounts, she recognized the significance of what was unfolding. "Just so you know," she said clearly, "this interaction is being recorded. For everyone's protection and accountability." Vanessa's head snapped toward Lindsay. "You have no right to film me without consent. Actually, on a commercial flight, there's no expectation of privacy," Lindsay replied calmly. "And I think it's important that your behavior is documented." This pushed Vanessa over an edge. She turned back to Marcus, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting here with your rehearsed story about saving money playing the victim when I'm just trying to look out for my daughter." Marcus remained still, his expression composed, despite the growing hostility directed at him. "I'm not playing anything, ma'am. This is my seat. I've earned it." "Earned it." Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "What could someone like you possibly know about earning anything? People like you always want handouts, always want special treatment." The ugly implication behind people like you hung in the air. Several passengers gasped audibly. Mrs. Garcia made the sign of the cross. Anthony Parker removed his reading glasses entirely, his expression hardening. Isabella stepped forward decisively. "Ma'am, that kind of language is unacceptable on this or any American Airways flight." But Vanessa was past the point of heeding warnings. She leaned closer to Marcus, her voice low, but still audible to nearby passengers. "Listen to me, you little fraud. I don't know what scheme you're running, but you don't belong here." Something inside her recognized she was crossing line after line, burning bridges she couldn't rebuild. A distant part of her mind watched in horror as she unraveled publicly. But she couldn't stop the cascade of resentment and insecurity that had been building for years. Marcus looked directly at her, his voice steady, despite the slight tremor in his hands. "My grandfather says dignity isn't about where you sit. It's about how you conduct yourself when tested." Something in the boy's composure, his refusal to be baited into responding with equal hostility, seemed to infuriate Vanessa further. She straightened up, nostrils flaring, and made a decision that would change the trajectory of the confrontation entirely. "If no one else is going to solve this problem, I will," she declared. She reached toward Marcus, as if to physically remove him from the seat. "I'll help you find your proper place." The threat of physical contact with a minor sent a shockwave through the cabin. Isabella moved quickly to intervene, positioning herself between Vanessa and Marcus. Anthony Parker rose to his feet, phone in hand. Lindsay Harrison's recording shifted from discreet to obvious. "Ma'am, do not touch that child," Isabella said firmly, all pretense of customer service pleasantry gone from her voice. "If you attempt to make physical contact with another passenger, especially a minor, I will be forced to call the captain and request security." Vanessa froze, suddenly aware that she had crossed a line that even her privileged background couldn't erase. But rather than retreat, she doubled down. "Fine. Call the captain," she said, chin raised defiantly. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this airline anyway. This entire situation is unacceptable." Isabella held Vanessa's gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish." She reached for the cabin phone, her voice calm but authoritative as she spoke into the receiver. "Captain Rivera, we have a situation in first class that requires your attention immediately." A tense silence fell over the cabin as everyone waited for the captain's arrival. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the window, though he wasn't seeing the airport beyond the glass. Olivia had pressed herself against the bulkhead, tears of shame streaming silently down her cheeks. Vanessa stood in the aisle, arms crossed, a study in righteous indignation, despite the growing realization that she might have miscalculated. The seconds ticked by, slowly, heavy with anticipation. Lindsay Harrison's phone continued recording. Anthony Parker had moved to stand near Mrs. Garcia, both of them positioned as silent sentinels, watchful protectors of a child being subjected to an adult's irrational anger. Then from the front of the aircraft came the sound of the cockpit door opening. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, authoritative. The curtain separating the galley from the cabin parted, and Captain Michael Rivera stepped into the fraught atmosphere of first class, his presence immediately commanding attention and respect. Every eye in the cabin turned to him, waiting to see how justice would be served. At 35,000 feet, Captain Michael Rivera filled the narrow aisle with his presence. At 47, he stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the erect posture of someone accustomed to command. His uniform was immaculate, his captain's wings gleaming against the dark fabric. Salt and pepper hair cropped close at the sides framed a face marked by experience, but not hardened by it. His eyes, dark and alert, took in the scene with a practiced scan that missed nothing. The cabin fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to dim in deference to his arrival. Captain Rivera had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years, following an early career as a military pilot. He'd handled emergency landings, navigated severe turbulence, and managed countless passenger conflicts. But there was something in his bearing that suggested this moment wasn't routine. "Isabella," he said, his voice calm but carrying natural authority. "What's the situation here?" Isabella straightened her shoulders. "Captain, we have a seating dispute. Ms. Morgan and her daughter are assigned to seats 23E and F in economy. But Ms. Morgan is insisting that this young passenger," she gestured to Marcus, "should give up his legitimately purchased first-class seat for her daughter." Captain Rivera nodded once. "And has the young man's ticket been verified?" "Yes, sir. His boarding pass confirms seat 2A first class. The reservation was made correctly and paid in full." The captain turned to Vanessa Morgan, who stood with arms crossed. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding passes, please?" Vanessa thrust the documents toward him. "There's obviously been some mistake. My daughter and I always fly first class. Your computer system must have glitched during check-in." Captain Rivera examined the boarding passes, his expression neutral. "These passes clearly indicate seats 23E and F in the main cabin," he said evenly. "Our system records show these were the seats selected at the time of purchase. There appears to be no error." "Well, then someone needs to fix it," Vanessa insisted. "My daughter is traveling to San Francisco for an important academic competition. She needs to prepare, and she can't do that cramped in economy." Captain Rivera turned to Marcus, his approach gentler. "Young man, may I see your boarding pass as well?" Marcus handed over his document. "Yes, sir." The captain reviewed it, then asked, "And you're traveling alone today?" "Yes, sir. I'm visiting my grandfather in San Francisco." "I understand you saved for this ticket yourself." Marcus nodded. "For 2 years, sir. My grandfather helped me make a savings plan. I put aside most of my allowance each week, plus extra money from chores and birthdays." Captain Rivera's expression softened slightly. "That's quite impressive. What's your grandfather's name, son?" "Colonel Harold Williams, sir. Retired U.S. Army." Something flickered in Captain Rivera's eyes. Recognition, respect, perhaps even a personal connection. He handed the boarding pass back to Marcus with a slight nod. Turning back to Vanessa, his expression shifted to one of professional neutrality. "Ma'am, I've reviewed both boarding passes. This young man is correctly seated in 2A with a validly purchased first-class ticket. You and your daughter are assigned to the main cabin seats, 23E and F." Vanessa's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who I am? I'm a Platinum Elite member of your airline's loyalty program. I spend thousands of dollars on flights every year. I appreciate your loyalty to American Airways." Captain Rivera replied evenly. "However, our policies are clear. We cannot and will not ask a passenger to surrender a seat they have legitimately purchased regardless of age or status." "He's a child," Vanessa hissed, as if this fact alone should invalidate Marcus's right to occupy the space he'd paid for. What possible reason could a child have for flying first class alone? Captain Rivera considered her question, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. "People fly first class for many reasons, ma'am. Some for comfort, some for status, some because they've worked hard and saved for the experience." He glanced at Marcus. "In my experience, intention matters more than age." Vanessa sensed she was losing ground, but couldn't bring herself to concede. Her voice took on a desperate edge. This isn't about age. It's about appropriate allocation of resources. My daughter needs this seat for legitimate academic purposes. He's just a kid on vacation. The captain's posture straightened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that nonetheless commanded attention. Every passenger in the cabin could sense that they were witnessing a moment of reckoning. Ms. Morgan. Captain Rivera said, his voice quiet but firm. On my aircraft, every passenger with a valid ticket deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Every passenger. He emphasized the word in a way that made its meaning unmistakable. This young man has purchased his ticket legitimately. He has conducted himself with remarkable composure under difficult circumstances, and he will remain in the seat he paid for. Vanessa opened her mouth to object further, but Captain Rivera raised his hand slightly, a gesture both gentle and unmistakable in its authority. Before you continue, Ms. Morgan, I should inform you that our airline has clear policies regarding passenger conduct. Attempting to intimidate another passenger, making discriminatory remarks, or threatening physical contact could result in removal from the flight. His tone remained professional, but the warning was clear. I would strongly advise against escalating this situation further. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vanessa's face. The realization that she might have crossed a line that could have actual consequences, that her status and privilege might not shield her in this instance, seemed to penetrate her indignation. Captain Rivera turned back to Marcus. Son, you mentioned your grandfather is Colonel Harold Williams. Marcus straightened in his seat. Yes, sir. The captain nodded thoughtfully. I believe our paths crossed during Desert Storm. 82nd Airborne. Correct. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Yes, sir. That's right. He was a good man. Fair, but firm. I served briefly under his command during a joint operation. The captain's eyes held a distant memory for a moment. If you're Colonel Williams's grandson, it explains a lot about your conduct today. He extended his hand to Marcus. It's an honor to have you aboard, son. Marcus shook the captain's hand, his composure momentarily giving way to the 11-year-old boy beneath the remarkable self-possession. Thank you, sir. This exchange, this recognition of Marcus as someone with connections and history, rather than just an anonymous child to be dismissed, shifted the energy in the cabin profoundly. Passengers who had been watching with concern now smiled. Anthony Parker nodded approvingly. Mrs. Garcia wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Vanessa Morgan stood frozen in the aisle, the ground beneath her privilege crumbling. Her daughter Olivia, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, let's just go to our seats. The quiet plea seemed to penetrate Vanessa's armor in a way that nothing else had. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the tears, the shame, the silent pleading. For a brief moment, something like recognition flickered in her eyes. Awareness that her behavior was hurting the very person she claimed to be advocating for. Captain Rivera observed this moment of potential insight with the patience of someone who understood that true change often happens in small private realizations rather than grand public gestures. Ms. Morgan, he said gently, I understand this isn't the outcome you expected, but I need to ensure that all passengers can board safely and that we depart on schedule. May I escort you and your daughter to your assigned seats in the main cabin? The question was framed as a courtesy, but the underlying message was clear. The discussion was over. The time had come for resolution and movement forward. Vanessa Morgan stood at a crossroads. Continue fighting a battle she could not win at the cost of potential removal from the flight and further humiliation, or accept the reality before her and salvage what dignity remained. The cabin held its collective breath, waiting to see which path she would choose. Captain Rivera's gaze remained steady on Vanessa Morgan, his expression neither triumphant nor condemning. In his decades of leadership, he had learned that how you allow someone to retreat from a mistake often determines whether they learn from it or simply seek revenge. Ms. Morgan, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, though the silent cabin made privacy impossible. On this aircraft, there are two types of first class, the kind you purchase with money and the kind you earn through character. This young man has both. The words landed like thunder without sound. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in quiet agreement, others sitting straighter, as if the captain's wisdom had physically aligned their spines. Lindsay Harrison's phone captured what would soon become the most quoted line in a video viewed by millions. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from her body. Behind the armor of entitlement, she was simply a tired, insecure woman who had lost her way. "Fine," she said, the word barely audible. "Fine." Captain Rivera nodded once, acknowledging her concession without pressing his advantage. "Isabella will show you to your seats in the main cabin. If you'd like, we can check for upgrade possibilities after takeoff, though. As mentioned, this flight is nearly full." "I just want to get to San Francisco," Vanessa muttered, not meeting his eyes. "Of course." The captain turned to Isabella. "Please assist Ms. Morgan and her daughter in finding their assigned seats." But before he could lead them away, Captain Rivera added, his tone still professional, but with an edge of steel beneath the courtesy. "Ms. Morgan, I want to be very clear about something. The behavior you displayed today toward another passenger, particularly a minor, traveling alone, violated several of our airline's conduct policies." Vanessa looked up sharply, alarm replacing resignation. Under normal circumstances, the captain continued such behavior could warrant removal from the flight and possibly restrictions on future travel. However, given that your daughter has an important commitment in San Francisco, I'm exercising my discretion to allow you to continue your journey today. He paused, making sure his next words registered fully. "But this decision comes with a condition. There must be no further disruptions, no comments to or about other passengers, and no attempts to change seating arrangements without crew approval. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate consequences upon landing. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" Vanessa swallowed hard, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "Yes," she managed. "Good," Captain Rivera said, not unkindly. "Isabella will assist you now." As Isabella began leading Vanessa and Olivia toward the main cabin, something unexpected happened. Olivia stopped, abruptly turned, and walked back to Marcus's seat. Her mother reached for her arm, but Olivia gently pulled away. Standing before Marcus, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes direct and honest, she spoke words that would later be described by witnesses as one of the bravest acts they'd ever seen from a teenager. "I'm really sorry," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "What my mom said to you was wrong. You didn't deserve any of that. Your seat is yours because you worked for it." Her voice caught. "I should have said something sooner." The simple apology, delivered without excuses or qualifications, hung in the air like a cleansing rain. Marcus looked up at Olivia, seeing not the daughter of the woman who had tried to humiliate him, but a person making a difficult choice to do what was right. "Thank you," he said simply. "Good luck with your competition." Olivia nodded, a small smile of gratitude flickering across her face, before she turned to rejoin her mother, who stood frozen in the aisle, witnessing her daughter demonstrate the character she herself had failed to show. As Vanessa Morgan finally made her way to the economy section, every pair of eyes in the first-class cabin followed her progress. It wasn't the triumphant procession she was accustomed to, with admiring glances and deferential treatment. It was the walk of someone whose facade had cracked, revealing the insecurity and prejudice beneath the designer clothes and aggressive confidence. Back in first class, an extraordinary thing happened. As if released from a spell, passengers broke into spontaneous applause, not loud or mocking, but the genuine recognition of something important having transpired. They weren't applauding Vanessa's humiliation, but rather the restoration of justice, the triumph of dignity over entitlement. Marcus Williams sat quietly amidst the applause, neither joining in nor appearing smug. His composure, maintained throughout the ordeal, remained intact. This wasn't a moment of victory for him. It was simply the acknowledgement of what was right. Captain Rivera placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You handled yourself with remarkable poise, son. Your grandfather would be proud. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Mrs. Garcia leaned across the aisle. You remind me of another brave young person who once held his ground with dignity. Ruby Bridges. Do you know her story? Marcus nodded. Yes, ma'am. We studied her in school last year. Good, she said with a warm smile. It's important to know whose shoulders we stand on. As the applause faded, passengers began removing their phones, many of them already sharing what they had witnessed. Lindsay Harrison, who had recorded the entire confrontation, was quietly editing the footage, adding captions that would make the video accessible. This is going viral the moment we land, Anthony Parker remarked to no one in particular. Some things need to be seen. Isabella returned to the first-class cabin, her professional demeanor firmly back in place, though her eyes conveyed pride when they met Marcus's. Everything's settled, she reported to Captain Rivera. We're ready for departure. The captain nodded. Excellent. He turned to address the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during that delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate shortly. But before we do, I'd like to say something. The cabin quieted immediately, all attention focused on the man who had just demonstrated such exemplary leadership. In my 22 years as a commercial pilot, I've come to believe that an aircraft is more than just a means of transportation. It's a temporary community. For the hours we spend together between departure and arrival, we are connected by shared space, shared experience, and shared responsibility to treat each other with dignity. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces turned toward him. What I witnessed today reinforced my faith in humanity. I saw passengers standing up for what's right. I saw a young man demonstrate extraordinary grace under pressure. I saw a young woman find her voice and use it for good. Captain Rivera's eyes settled briefly on Marcus. And I was reminded that character isn't determined by age, status, or circumstance, but by the choices we make when tested. He straightened his uniform jacket slightly. It's an honor to be your captain today. We'll be arriving in San Francisco on schedule. Thank you. With that, he turned and walked back to the cockpit, leaving behind a cabin of passengers who felt not just like travelers on the same flight, but witnesses to something significant. A moment when small acts of courage combined to affirm that dignity could not be purchased, but must be earned and protected. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Marcus Williams looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, receding in the distance. In his pocket was the boarding pass he had worked 2 years to earn. Ahead of him was a reunion with his grandfather, who had taught him the value of perseverance and self-respect. And surrounding him were people who had seen him, truly seen him, not as a child to be dismissed, but as a person worthy of the same respect accorded to anyone else. Social media was already buzzing with early accounts from passengers who had texted friends and family before takeoff. That first-class kid was trending in Chicago before Flight 873 even left the ground. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the hashtag had spread to both coasts. But Marcus knew none of this as the plane climbed through the clouds. He simply opened his book, settled into the seat he had earned through 2 years of dedication, and continued his journey, not just to San Francisco, but into a future shaped by the knowledge that he could stand his ground with dignity, even when the ground beneath him was 35,000 feet in the air. The remainder of Flight 873 proceeded with a peculiar mix of routine and electricity. Flight attendants served drinks and meals with professional efficiency, while passengers alternated between normal activities and whispered discussions about what they had witnessed. In first class, Marcus became the quiet center of a subtle constellation of support. Isabella made sure his apple juice was always refilled. Anthony Parker offered him a business magazine after noticing his interest in technology startups. Mrs. Garcia taught him a card game her own grandchildren loved played across the aisle during a period of smooth air. None of this attention was intrusive. It wasn't the fawning attention adults sometimes direct at children they find precocious. Rather, it was the natural respect accorded to someone who had earned it through their conduct. "Have you visited San Francisco before?" Mrs. Garcia asked as she shuffled cards. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "My grandfather moved there when I was 6. but this is my first time going to see him. Ah, you're in for a treat. The fog comes in like a living thing. Marcus smiled. That's exactly what my grandfather says in his letters. Throughout these interactions, Lindsay Harrison observed quietly from her seat, occasionally making notes on her phone. As a content creator with a substantial following, she understood the ethical implications of what she had captured. Before landing, she approached Marcus. "Excuse me," she said, kneeling at eye level. "I recorded what happened earlier, but I won't post it without your permission. Would it be okay if I talk to your father about it when we land?" Marcus considered this thoughtfully. "I think so. My dad says that sometimes stories need to be told so people can learn from them." Lindsay smiled. "Your dad sounds wise. Like his father before him, I'm guessing." Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Vanessa Morgan sat rigidly in seat 23, her designer sunglasses firmly in place despite the dimmed cabin. She had not spoken since taking her seat, had refused the offered beverage service, had ignored the flight attendant's standard questions about comfort. Beside her, Olivia alternated between staring out the small window and writing in a notebook. The words that flowed across the page weren't competition preparation, but a processing of what had transpired. Reflections on her mother's behavior, her own silence until it was almost too late, and the moment she had finally found her voice. On one page, she wrote, "I've been thinking about Ruby Bridges a lot today. She was 6. 6. And she faced down crowds of angry adults. I'm 13 and I could barely stand up to my own mother. I need to be braver." As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Captain Rivera's voice came over the intercom with standard arrival information. But he concluded with something less standard. "I want to thank all of our passengers today for demonstrating that how we treat each other during challenging moments defines us more than any seating assignment or status. It has been an honor serving as your captain." When Flight 873 finally touched down, the usual rush to retrieve belongings was tempered by something unusual. Passengers allowing Marcus to move ahead, creating space for him with small gestures of respect. As he stepped into the terminal, Marcus scanned the waiting area, searching for his grandfather's familiar face. What he saw instead momentarily stopped him in his tracks. Colonel Harold Williams stood tall in his civilian clothes, pressed khakis, and a blue button-down shirt that mirrored his grandson's outfit. Beside him stood Dr. James Williams, Marcus's father, who had flown out the previous day to surprise his son. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood a small group of reporters, cameras at the ready, a development that Colonel Williams was clearly not comfortable with, but was tolerating with military stoicism. "Grandpa, Dad," Marcus called out, breaking into a run despite the weight of his backpack. Colonel Williams opened his arms, enfolding his grandson in an embrace that contained 2 years of anticipation. "There he is," the older man said, his voice rough with emotion. "First class all the way." Dr. Williams joined the embrace, the 3 generations of Williams men, forming a tight circle of connection that needed no words to express its significance. When they finally separated, Colonel Williams held his grandson at arm's length, examining him with pride. "Your father called me from Chicago last night. Told me there was some trouble on your flight." Marcus nodded, suddenly conscious of the reporters hovering nearby. "Yes, sir. But Captain Rivera handled it." "So I hear," Colonel Williams replied, his expression softening. "He called me this morning. Michael Rivera. We served together in Desert Storm. Said my grandson conducted himself with more dignity than most grown men he's encountered." The revelation that the captain had personally contacted his grandfather made Marcus stand a little straighter. He was really fair, Grandpa. He didn't make a big scene or embarrass anyone. He just made sure things were right. "That sounds like Mike," Colonel Williams nodded. "Always had a good head on his shoulders." He glanced at the waiting reporters. "Seems like your adventure has attracted some attention." Dr. Williams placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to, Marcus. We can walk right past." Marcus considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "It's okay, Dad. I don't mind. But can you stay with me?" "Always," his father replied simply. As they approached the small media gathering, Lindsay Harrison joined them, having kept her promise to speak with Dr. Williams before sharing her footage. After a brief conversation where she explained her intentions and agreed to donate any monetization revenue to a scholarship fund, Dr. Williams gave his consent for the video to be shared. Meanwhile, a reporter stepped forward. Marcus, I'm Sophia James from KGO TV. Videos of what happened on your flight are already going viral. How do you feel about becoming an internet sensation? Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Videos I didn't know people were recording. Another reporter joined in. Several passengers uploaded clips before the plane even landed. The hashtag #FirstClassKid is trending nationwide. Captain Rivera's quote about 2 types of first class has already been shared over 100,000 times. As Marcus answered a few questions with the poise that had now become his hallmark, Vanessa and Olivia Morgan emerged from the jetway. Seeing the media gathered around Marcus, Vanessa grabbed her daughter's arm and tried to steer her toward the nearest exit. But Olivia stood firm. Mom, wait. Vanessa turned her expression a mixture of impatience and lingering humiliation. Olivia, we need to get to the hotel. Your competition is tomorrow. This will just take a minute, Olivia said with newfound determination. She walked directly to where Marcus stood with his family cameras capturing her approach. The reporters fell silent, sensing another significant moment unfolding. Marcus watched Olivia approach, his expression curious, but not unwelcoming. Hi again, Olivia said, her voice steady, despite the cameras now trained on her. I just wanted to say once more how sorry I am about what happened. And she hesitated, then continued with renewed resolve. I want you to know that what you did, standing up for yourself while staying so calm and respectful, it taught me something important. So thank you. Marcus extended his hand to her. Thank you for apologizing. That took courage. Olivia shook his hand, a small smile of relief crossing her face. Good luck with your visit, she said. San Francisco is amazing. Good luck with your competition, Marcus replied, as Olivia turned to rejoin her mother, who stood rigid with barely contained mortification. A reporter called out, Olivia, how does it feel to apologize for your mother's behavior? Olivia paused, considered the question, then answered with surprising wisdom for her 13 years. It feels right. When someone makes a mistake, they should acknowledge it and try to make it better. That's what my teachers have always taught me. The simple statement delivered without drama or self-righteousness would later be cited as the second most powerful moment in the entire viral story. A young person demonstrating that moral courage sometimes means standing apart from those closest to you. As the Morgan women finally departed, Colonel Williams placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. I think we've given the news people enough for one day. What do you say we head home and get you settled? Marcus nodded suddenly. Looking very much like the 11-year-old boy, he was tired after an emotional journey. Can we get ice cream on the way? Dr. Williams laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. After what you've handled today, I think you've earned any dessert you want. The 3 Williams men walked through the terminal together, unaware that their lives had been fundamentally altered by the events of that flight. That Marcus's 2-year journey to save for a first-class ticket had culminated not just in a reunion with his grandfather, but in a moment that would inspire conversations about dignity, respect, and standing firm in the face of prejudice in households across the country. 1 year after the events of Flight 873, Marcus Williams stood before an audience of educators and students at a character education conference in Chicago. Now 12, he had grown taller. His voice had deepened slightly, but his thoughtful demeanor remained unchanged. When I decided to save for a first-class ticket, he began, I thought I was just learning about money. I didn't realize I was preparing for a moment that would test everything my father and grandfather taught me about standing up for myself with dignity. The audience listened attentively as Marcus reflected on his experience with a wisdom that transcended his years. People ask how I stayed calm when faced with such obvious prejudice. He continued, the truth is, I wasn't calm inside. I was scared and confused and angry. But my grandfather taught me that dignity isn't about never feeling those emotions. It's about not letting them control your actions. He paused, looking toward where Colonel Harold Williams and Dr. James Williams sat watching with pride. What happened wasn't just about an airplane seat. It was about who gets to occupy spaces they've earned. It was about assumptions people make based on appearance rather than character. And it was about the choice we all have when faced with injustice, to respond with anger that escalates or with firmness that elevates. In the years since the incident, the Williams First Class Character Foundation had established programs in 26 cities, providing financial literacy education and character development for over 15,000 children. The curriculum incorporated not just practical skills, but also lessons about dignity, respect, and standing firm in difficult situations. Captain Michael Rivera's training program had been implemented across American Airways and was being adapted by 3 other major carriers. Flight attendants reported feeling more empowered to address discriminatory behavior, and passenger surveys showed increased confidence that the airline would handle such situations appropriately. Yet challenges remained. Despite these positive developments, incidents of discrimination continued to occur in various contexts across the country. The change sparked by Marcus's experience was meaningful but limited in scope, a reminder that individual moments of justice, while powerful, must be part of a larger sustained effort to address deeper biases. Vanessa Morgan's journey had been particularly complex. After 6 months of therapy, both individual and family-based, she had begun to confront the insecurities and fears that drove her behavior. Progress was neither linear nor complete. Some days she reverted to old patterns of entitlement. Other days, she showed genuine growth. Her relationship with Olivia remained fragile but healing. The community center volunteering had become a weekly mother-daughter activity, initially tense, but gradually evolving into something meaningful for both of them. Vanessa had even joined the center's fundraising committee, applying her business skills to secure much-needed resources for their educational programs. The hardest part, she admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability during a therapy session, that both she and Olivia had agreed could be shared for educational purposes, is facing how much of my identity was built on feeling superior to others. When that's stripped away, who am I? This question, perhaps the most honest she had ever asked herself, marked the beginning of a more authentic self-examination than any public apology could have achieved. As Marcus concluded his address, he shared the philosophy that continued to guide his approach to life. Real class isn't determined by where you sit, but by how you stand when challenged. It's not about the privileges you claim, but about the dignity you extend to others and expect for yourself. After the conference, as Marcus signed copies of the children's book he had co-authored about saving and self-respect, a young girl approached with her mother. "Because of your story," she said shyly, "I started saving for dance classes that my family couldn't afford. I'm halfway there." This, more than the viral fame or the foundation's success, was the legacy Marcus valued most. The knowledge that his experience had empowered other young people to set goals, work toward them with determination, and occupy their earned spaces with confidence and dignity. "What you earn through your own effort belongs to you forever," Marcus told the girl, echoing his grandfather's words. "And so does the strength you build along the way." Have you ever stood your ground with dignity when someone tried to make you feel small? Share your story in the comments below. And remember that in life's challenging moments, it's not about where you sit, but how you stand. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and dignity. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they deserve to occupy the spaces they've earned. Together, we can create a world where character matters more than status, and where respect is given freely, regardless of age, race, or background. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages. So don't forget to hit that notification bell to catch our next video. Let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you witnessed this situation on a flight?